Bibles this morning, if you would turn to the book of Daniel, Daniel chapter number 3. Our series in the book of Daniel. I don't know if we're going to finish the book of Daniel consecutively, as we're going to take some time out here pretty soon. Of course, we have homecoming, and when we get to December, I always like to try to do something the holiday, Christmas related, and something themed towards that. But Daniel chapter number 3 is where we're at here this morning. I really greatly enjoyed last Sunday's service as we looked at the interpretation of King Neb's dream there at the end of chapter 2, and how we relay that to as we partook of the Lord's Supper last week. What a powerful time that was, and just thanking God not only for what He's done for us through His Son on the cross, but also looking forward to that coming kingdom, knowing that He's in control. God makes no mistakes, and so let's never forget what Jesus did for us. And we talk about remembering. That's what communion is all about, is remembering what Christ has done for us on the cross. But let's not ever forget about the kingdom that's to come as well. We don't just look backwards in our Christian life. We have so much to be thankful for, so much to remember. But we have so much to look forward to as well. The best is yet to come, and we're so thankful for the coming kingdom that we get to be a part of if you're a child of His. And so what a powerful service last week was, and thank you for being here. I enjoyed last week immensely. But here we come to chapter 3, and this is a very very well-acquainted story. It's probably one you learned when you were in primary Sunday school, right? It's one that that you learned about when you were in Pee Wee Church, or maybe it was during Vacation Bible School that you were first exposed to the three boys, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Now we know that was not their birth names, their given names, their Hebrew names. That was the names they were given when they were trying to be indoctrinated by the Babylonians. But Hananiah, Azariah, and Mishael were their real names. But for the sake of our time here, and of course that's what they're called in the book of Daniel, we're going to call them Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. I was doing some looking at their names and looking into them a little bit, and I found there's songs about them. There's so many things about those three boys' names. There's one, I forgot to use it yesterday, because yesterday turned out to be, I was in the ER with Remy for most of the day yesterday, and it's always something with our family, and we mentioned that Wednesday, just four kids under 8, it's always something. Thankfully she's fine, but I was planning on using it last night, but I even found one song that was trying to get your kids to go to bed. It was Shadrach, Meshach, and to bed we go. I like that one. I've heard more than one story of kids misunderstanding what it is and saying Shadrach, Meshach, and a billy goat. You've probably heard that before. Many people think that there was a billy goat with them in that fiery furnace. That was not the case as well. But no matter when you heard about the story, no doubt the very first time you heard of the story, we marveled at their courage, and we were amazed that God would protect them in the middle of that fiery furnace. We learned to fear pagan kings, if you will, because of the pronouncements, the decrees that could be made. Well, despite the catchy sound of their names, and it is, the actual story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego here in Daniel chapter 3 is a very intense and dramatic story, to say the least. We have very much to learn from their encounter with Nebuchadnezzar there in the fiery furnace. Most of us, I believe, have come to understand, if you've been saved any length of time, you understand the truth that this thing called the Christian life is difficult, to say the least, right? We wish it was easy. Sometimes we talk like it's a breeze, but the Christian life is anything but easy. It's very difficult. We found that we are at odds with the world and how they live, haven't we? It doesn't take long to realize this world does not have the same values and the same understandings that we do. So we are against the world, and the world is wholeheartedly against us, if you've not realized that yet. But not only that, we're also at odds with the devil and what he wants, 2 Peter tells us. And so we understand that the devil wants to destroy us. So we have the world trying to make us conform to be like them. We have the devil trying to get us to slip up and to be caught up in the traps of temptation. But if that wasn't enough, we also have this thing called the flesh inside of us. We talked about it this morning in Sunday school a little bit. We have the flesh inside of us that lives in us, that wants to do what it wants to do. So we're being tugged at in every direction, if you will, in the Christian life, and it makes it difficult. And so with all this conflict, with all these things tugging at us, there comes the temptation to conform to the influences around us, to go the way of the world, to go the way of the flesh, to go the way of the devil, if you will. And that is what much of the so-called Christian community is doing. A lot of people who have the moniker or the name of Jesus, who claim to be Christians, no doubt have conformed wholeheartedly to the things of this world. They look nothing like what the early church did. They look nothing like what Jesus desires His followers to look like, or even said that His followers look like, but they still claim the name of Christ. We see churches and homes and families and individuals who have left this high road of separation that God has called us to be different than the world, and they've sold out to the world and the flesh and the devil. And that's why this story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego is so needed in our day, because these three Hebrew boys, these men, these young men, teach us valuable lessons. They teach us that it is possible, surprisingly, but it is possible to be on fire for God, even when most of those around us are headed on their way to hell. You know, we read a lot of these stories in the Bible. I think about Noah when he built the ark, and we think, man, we live in such a wicked world. Is it possible to stand up, and is it possible to be faithful in such a wicked world? Well, Noah proved that it was. And here we have Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego proving that when everybody else around them is bowing and giving in to the pressure of this world, that it is possible to stand strong, to have courage under fire, which is what I titled the sermon this morning, Courage Under Fire. And that's where genuine faith in Jesus Christ, where there is genuine faith, there is fire. You're going to be on fire for Him. Our enemies, the world, the flesh, the devil, want nothing more than to extinguish our fire. They want to extinguish our faith. They want to mold us into their image. But the bottom line is, we can live for God. We can. And we should. It is possible. We can stand up for Him and be on fire in these last days. And these verses tell us how we can do that. So let me recap very quickly. At the end of chapter 2, what we came to understand is that Daniel was able to interpret King Nebuchadnezzar's dream. The king made him a very senior official there in the empire of Babylon. And at Daniel's suggestion, the king also gave Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego some very prominent positions. We were not able to touch on that very much as the very last few verses of chapter 2. But for the sake of time last week, because of communion, taking the Lord's Supper, we didn't get into that last point. There wasn't a whole lot to get into anyway. But the fact of the matter is, Daniel got his friends promoted to even higher positions of authority in Babylon. Now, in chapter 2, these men were probably around the age of 22 years old. Now, remember when we started, they were probably somewhere around 15, 16 years old. Now they're probably early 20s. Well, we know, looking at, pretty much, it's been about 16 years from the end of chapter 2 to chapter 3. So now these young men are in their probably early 30s, somewhere around there, maybe mid-30s. And so during these years, they have been serving as officials in the government. Okay, so this doesn't happen overnight. They've been serving as these officials, and they've gained responsibilities, they've gained authority, but they've also gained some enemies. So I want us to look at this story and see what we can learn from these Hebrew men to understand how we can have courage under fire as well. So let's look at this story. And the first thing we see is the demand of the king. What was the demand of the king? We'll look at verse 1, and first of all, you'll notice the context of what's going on here. Nebuchadnezzar the king made an image of gold whose height was 80 cubits, and the breadth thereof 6 cubits. He set it up in the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. Now, if you remember in chapter 2, the dream, the context of the dream, or the interpretation of the dream that King Nebuchadnezzar had, was of this statue made of, the head was made of gold, and then it got less expensive material as you went down all the way to iron mixed with clay for the feet. Of course, we know it represented all the empires that would overtake him. But do you think it's any coincidence that here in chapter 3, he makes this statue? And what does he use? Gold. And an interesting, he makes the whole thing out of gold. So obviously it's no doubt very heavy. I guess he said, I guess this dream I had, because I had all these metals that went down in value, and they went down in how strong they were. So he made the whole thing out of gold. It wasn't going to be too top heavy. It wasn't going to be easily destroyed. I don't know what his thought was, but that's what he decided to do. Verse 2. Then Nebuchadnezzar the king sent to gather together the princes, the governors, the captains, the judges, the treasurers, the counselors, the sheriffs, and all the rulers of the provinces to come to the dedication of the image which Nebuchadnezzar the king had set up. Then the princes, the governors, the captains, the judges, the treasurers, the counselors, the sheriffs, and all the rulers of the provinces were gathered together unto the dedication of the image that Nebuchadnezzar the king had set up, and they stood before the image that Nebuchadnezzar had set up. So just to give you the context here of what's going on, we see that he sets this statue up, made completely out of gold, this humongous statue in the middle of this plain, and he invites everybody who's anybody to come and at this dedication ceremony that's going on there. Now, we don't know, by the way, we don't know what this statue was a picture of. Okay, many people think it was a statue of Nebuchadnezzar himself. Many people believe that it was one of the gods they served. Of course, Nebuchadnezzar was a polytheist. He believed in many gods, and so they think it was one of those. The Bible doesn't tell us what the statue looked like or what the statue was made out of, and I really don't think it matters. Probably the reason Daniel didn't give us that information was because that didn't matter. What mattered the most was the obedience to the command that was given to worship this 90-foot high and 9-foot wide statue. Now, can you imagine? That's as big as a lot of buildings that we see. That's how big this thing is. These people have come to. So this was not only an act of respect to the king to bow down to this, but it was also an act of worship that was used. By the way, it also was not a very pleasant experience. If you have a job and you get called in for like a meeting of some sort that's just kind of a normal meeting that you have, probably most people that go to that meeting are thinking, oh, here we go, it's just a waste of time. It takes me for doing what I really want to do, right? You know, the stuff that I can be doing. I've got to have this meeting to go to, or I've got this conference call to make, or whatever the case may be. Well, all these people from all over the region have come for this big ceremony, and you can imagine most of them don't want to be there. Most of them don't really care what the king's doing. They're going to do whatever the king says. They just want to be a brown noser. They want to make sure the king. They know the king has. They have the king's respect, so they don't want to be there either. They're civil servants, but they say yes, and they're there. And so to say yes to the emperor, no doubt ensured a comfortable life. So they probably said yes to most everything he said. King says to do something, yes, sir. I'll get right on that, sir. Whatever you want, sir. They probably got in the positions they were at because they had said yes so many times. Even, you can imagine, just to say no one time to the king probably was to throw away everything you'd ever known and loved, to throw away your position, to give everything away. Now, for some reason, Daniel was not present at this event. We don't know why, but we know that his three friends were, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. That they were required to attend. And they were no doubt pressured to bow just like everybody else was because their futures depended on it. They didn't want to be there any more than anybody else did, but they were expected to bow just like everybody else was expected to bow. They had everything to lose. Now, you can almost say when they were younger, they had nothing to lose when they decided not to eat the king's meat back in Daniel chapter 1. You say, well, that was no big deal. They didn't really have much to lose. They didn't have anything to lose. Well, things have changed. We've come to chapter 3. They are now pretty big wigs in Babylon. And now they have a whole lot more to lose than they ever did in chapter 1. They've got a secure income. They've got a career in front of them. Again, puts us in a lot of our spots. We think, oh, well, young people, they can make those decisions for God. They can be sold out to God. But, Brother Agent, I've got a family. Brother Agent, I've got kids and grandkids. I can't make those same kind of sacrifices that young people and teenagers can make. Well, the Bible shows us very clearly that you can. The same challenge that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego have in front of them is the same challenge that comes to us, whether it's at school, on the playground even, or whether it's at college, and certainly in the workplace and in social context. The pressures that we face, the willingness to stand out from the crowd. I want you to think, what temptations do you deal with on a daily basis at your job or your circle of influence that makes you want to conform to them? It's hard to maintain your integrity. It's hard to maintain your profession of faith in Jesus Christ. Listen, I want you to have no doubt that all of us face these tests. And many times they're small, no doubt about it. It's small, seemingly insignificant things. But occasionally there are some more demanding things that do cross our path, like here in Daniel chapter 3. And so in theory, it's not difficult to say yes to acknowledge God, right? I love God. I'm all for Him. But in the real world, when the pressures are around us, when we have stuff we can lose, right? When there's a price to be paid, the pressure's on. We have a lot to learn about ourselves, don't we? We have a lot to learn about our convictions, whether we are truly hold dear to them or whether they're negotiable or not. Well, that's what's here in front of these three Hebrew boys. They've got everything to lose now. They're no longer young kids anymore. They're a little bit older and they've got a lot to lose. Are they going to lose it all for the sake of Christ? Or are they going to conform like everybody else would have conformed? Well, sooner or later, just like for all of us, there came a time for them to face the music. And that's what he told them in verse 4. Then a herald cried aloud. And here's what he said. To you it is commanded, O people, nations, and languages, that at the time ye hear the sound of the cornet, flute, harp, sackbut, psaltery, dulcimer, and all kinds of music, ye fall down and worship the golden image that Nebuchadnezzar the king hath set up. And whoso falleth not down and worshipeth shall the same hour be cast into the midst of a burning, fiery furnace. Therefore, at that time when all the people heard the sound of the cornet, flute, harp, sackbut, psaltery, and all kinds of music, all the people, the nations, and languages fell down and worshipped the golden image that Nebuchadnezzar the king had set up. So everything had gone according to the king's plan, and if everything would have gone perfectly to his plan, it would have been this very spectacular ceremony. You'd have this huge crowd of people full of everybody and anybody that was somebody there. You would have, they would gather, you'd have this awesome 90-foot high golden image standing in front of them. The music would play. You'd have this furnace over here, billowing smoke from the top of it. It would have been a sight to behold. And there you have the choice. When the music plays, there's your choice. Bow down in front of this image or get thrown into this furnace. Now, it seems like a pretty easy decision for most people, right? And it was for most people. It's a lot easier to bow one time and get it over with than it is to risk my life and be thrown into this furnace. And so the celebration began. The orchestra began to play, and all these political leaders began to bow down. Now, more than likely, instead of them all bowing down at the same time, they probably were separated into different categories, and they bowed down at different times, which is probably why they know, as we're going to see in the next part, that these Hebrew men did not bow down. How else would they known that they didn't bow down if everybody's bowing down on their face at the same time, right? You can imagine. So probably the group right behind them didn't see or saw that they weren't bowing. The celebration began, but the celebration was never completed. Now, I got to thinking about this before we get to point number 2. We don't have any clue how many people there were at this celebration. But put yourself in their shoes. Put yourself in the shoes of anybody at that celebration. How easy would it have been for you to have the same choice in front of you as everybody else there did? How easy would it be to choose to just do a quick bow, right? Would you really blame anybody if they took a quick bow, if you were there? Somebody that, no doubt there were other people who believed the same way that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego did, but the only three we know that for a fact did not bow, as we're going to see, were Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So if Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego had just bowed for that short time, would we be upset at them? Would we think, in today's day and age, we think, oh, I can't believe they did that? Or would our minds rationalize it like we do so many times in our own lives and say, well, I get it. Now, we know who they really serve. We know they don't serve this false god. We know they don't believe like these other people believe. We know who they're all about. We've seen the stance they've taken. Look at Daniel chapter 1. Look at what they were willing to risk then. They've got more to lose now. It's not that big of a deal for them to bow. To be honest with you, there's probably times in my life that I've thought many times that same thing. Big deal. If they'd have bowed, who's it hurting? Who's going to really care if they bow that much? I mean, I get to bow very quickly and then get back, and then I get to serve the rest of my life in a position of authority and serve God at the same time. And think about how many more people I can impact as a Christian in this position if I just do a quick bow, right? You ever felt that way before? If I can just compromise this one little way, then think about how many people I can influence for Christ in my position, or whatever job I have, whatever I do in this life. It's just one little compromise. It's not that big a deal. So the question again is, should they lose it all? Should they just bow and put everything at risk for something that everybody else would have quickly done and forgotten about? But I would say the vast majority of people in this room right now would have probably bowed and thought nothing else about it after it was over. Would they do it? Would they bow? Well, we get our answer very quickly. Look at verse 8, and we see the disobedience of the Jews. Verse 8. Wherefore at that time certain Chaldeans came near and accused the Jews. This is why I believe they probably all didn't bow at the same time. Maybe these Hebrew boys were supposed to bow before the Chaldeans, and the Chaldeans were next, and the people in front of them bowed, and these three boys didn't bow, and the Chaldeans said, hey, something's up here, and they went and told the king. They spake and said to the king Nebuchadnezzar, O king, live forever. Again, there's a little bit of brown nosing for you. Thou, O king, hast made a decree that every man that shall hear the sound of all these instruments and all kinds of music shall fall down and worship the golden image. And whoso falleth not down and worshipeth, that he should be cast in the midst of a burning fiery furnace. Don't you love, over and over again, we're going to see it in Daniel chapter 5 as well. They love reminding the king of what he said, right? You always love reminding the king what they said when it's something that benefits your purpose. But he says, verse 12, there are certain Jews whom thou hast set over the affairs of the province of Babylon, and he gives the names, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These men, O king, have not regarded thee. They serve not thy gods, nor worship the golden image which thou hast set up. So they make a charge against these boys. Here's the charge. Number one, they show disregard for the king's authority. Number two, they did not serve his gods. And number three, they would not bow down to the image. Now, why do you think these Chaldeans made this charge? What did they have to gain from tattletelling on these boys? Well, I believe no doubt there was some type of prejudice. We can call it racism if you want to or not. But no doubt these men did not like the fact that these Hebrew boys had come in and taken the positions of authority. Now we have a chance to throw them under the bus. As we're going to see later on with Daniel in the lion's den in a couple of chapters from now, we're going to see the same things happening, right? But they take it to a step even further. They do a stakeout on him to make sure, try to find any way that he's messed up. They didn't like the fact these boys had gotten the king's ear, that the king respected them. They didn't like it at all. And so the first chance they got to be a tattletale, the first chance they had to rub it in on them, they did it. You know what it reminds me of, and again, we're going to talk about it to an extent with Daniel as well, no doubt about it. But if you choose to put God first in your life, guess what? There's going to be people who don't like it. There are going to be people in your life who just don't like the fact that you are living for God. Maybe a family member. Could be a close friend. It could be a coworker. Maybe they're in your workplace. People are watching you and they're waiting to pounce on you at the very first infraction you have against what you claim to be a Christian. You talk a good talk, but you don't walk it all the time. And they love to jump all over you and throw it in your face that you're supposed to be a believer. And by the way, if you don't have anybody like that in your life, guess what? We all have the same enemy who likes to do that. 1 Peter chapter 5 and verse 8 tells us, be sober, be vigilant, because your adversary, the devil, as a roaring lion, walketh about seeking whom he may devour. So if you don't have a person in your life that likes to jump on you, guess what? The devil is roaming around looking at every one of our lives, just waiting to pounce in any opportunity he can when we are not standing up for what we should be. That's why he tells us in verse 9, he says, whom resist steadfast in the faith, knowing that the same afflictions are accomplished in your brethren that are in the world. So it's not if you're tested, right? It's when you're going to be tested. It's whether you're going to face opposition and possibly even persecution like these Hebrew boys did. It's going to take a different form. There's a lot of ways that it comes into our lives. But I want you to be encouraged, because the Bible tells us God's grace is sufficient for you. God's grace is sufficient for you to overcome whatever circumstance in your life you can withstand. We see it here in this passage. The Chaldeans didn't come up with a plan, did they? They did later on with Daniel. They didn't come up with a plan to trap these boys. These boys were just doing what they thought was right. And the Chaldeans jumped all over them as these accusing voices in their lives. They apparently interrupt the entire ceremony. As all these people are bowing down, you can see these Chaldeans say, ho, ho, stop the music. There's some people not bowing, king. You got an issue here, these three boys, and they name dropped them. They're not bowing down to you. They don't respect you. They don't respect your gods. And so when the king stopped the ceremony, everyone must have looked on with great interest to see what his response was going to be. Well, let's look at the response. Verse 13. Then Nebuchadnezzar, in his rage and fury, commanded to bring Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Then they brought these men before the king. Nebuchadnezzar spake and said unto them, is it true, O Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego? And listen to what he says here. Listen to the question he asked them. Do not ye serve my gods, nor worship the golden image which I have set up? Now, if you be ready, give them a second chance. If you're ready now, when you hear all this music, ye fall down and worship the King which I have made well. That's good. If you'll do it now, second chance, guys. If you'll do it, I'll spare your lives. But if ye worship not, ye shall be cast the same hour into the midst of a burning fiery furnace. Listen to this last question. What a braggadocious question he asked. And who is that God that shall deliver you out of my hands? What God do you serve that's going to save you from me, the King, is what he says. So here's your choice, boys. Maybe you didn't hear the music. Maybe you were too busy talking. Maybe you had earplugs in. Maybe you forgot the instructions. Whatever it is, here's your second chance. If you bow down this second time, I'll spare your lives. But if not, there is no God that I can think of that's going to save you from what's going to happen to you at my hands. Oh my goodness! Think about what big an issue this was for Nebuchadnezzar. It was a religious issue because he's not respecting his gods. It was a huge cost these boys were having to make. He's telling them, listen, your life is going to be forfeited if you defy me. If you're going to die this very same hour if you don't just bow this one time. Again, it seems like a very easy decision for most people to make. But he challenges God. Who is that God that shall deliver you out of my hands? Oh, it's never a good thing to challenge Almighty God, by the way. And he challenges God and expects nothing to happen. I think no doubt there are people that go to school with you, who work with you, who hang around, who, for some Christians, even their own family circles, that may mock you for following Jesus. They think it's a waste of time. They think you could serve a purpose greater and spend your time elsewhere more wisely. But the bottom line is, just as we're going to see here in just a second with King Nebuchadnezzar, there's going to come a day where everybody's going to be held accountable, that everybody's going to be held to give an account for their actions. Paul wrote in Galatians 6, he says, be not deceived. God is not, what's that next word? He's not mocked. He's not mocked. Now, King Nebuchadnezzar just flat out mocked the God, didn't he? Again, we have a lot of family and friends that may mock God. I've got family in my life who have mocked my stance for God and mocked my lifestyle for God. And it's going to happen. God is not mocked. For whatsoever a man soweth, that shall he also reap. Bottom line is, evil people never have the last word. God always has the last word. That's why Paul says again in Romans chapter 12, he says, recompense to no man evil for evil. Provide things honest in the sight of all men. If it be possible, as much as lieth in you, live peaceably with all men. Dearly beloved, avenge not yourselves, but rather give place unto wrath, for it is written, vengeance is mine. I will repay, saith the Lord. Therefore, if thine enemy hunger, feed him. If he thirst, give him drink. For in so doing thou shalt heap coals of fire on his head. Be not overcome of evil, but overcome evil with good. Do you and I share that same confidence in God that Paul had? I wonder sometimes. Paul's writing about the fact, listen, somebody does evil to you, somebody hurts you, you don't get back at them. Let God handle it. You don't worry about what somebody does to you. God gets the last word. Do we know that? Up here we do, don't we? But we don't live that way many times, do we? I know that God's going to take care of my situations. I know that God will avenge me. I know that God will get back at those people who take a stand against Him and against His children. But I just like to take care of it myself so many times, don't we? I like to make those people miserable. If they hurt me, I want to make them miserable. And Paul says, don't do that. He says, if your enemy hungers, give him something to drink. If he's hungry, give him something to eat. Because when you're doing that, he says, listen, all you're doing is heaping coals of fire upon his head. Don't overcome evil with evil. Overcome evil with good. So we see the boys' response in verse 16. He says, I'll give you a second chance. Listen to what the boys said. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered and said to the king, O Nebuchadnezzar, we're not careful to answer thee in this matter. He says, we don't have to think about it. If it be so, our God, whom we serve, is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and He will deliver us out of thine hand, O king. I want you to look at these next three words. He says, but if not. He said, King, we know that our God is all-powerful. We have no doubt in our minds that the God that we serve can save us from this burning fiery furnace if He so chooses. There's these three words that we don't talk about a whole lot. It's but if not. But if he chooses not to, be it known unto thee, O king, that we will not serve thy gods, nor worship the golden image which thou hast set up. Now, that response may seem abrupt. It may seem even disrespectful of what they're saying. But remember, who's the one that raised the issue? It was the king that raised the issue. He says, who's able to deliver these three out from my hands? And they said, King, we don't even have to give you an answer on this. Because the God that we serve, they said, guilty as charged, the God that we serve is able to save us. He's able to deliver us from this burning fire furnace. But if not, we're still not going to bow. If he chooses not to save us, he's still better than your gods. He's still worth more, and it's always worth it serving him. When the boys say, but if not, it really is a slap in the face to all this prosperity gospel, isn't it? It really is a slap in the face to this name it and claim it movement that says we can tell God what to do, that if we say something to God, he's got to do it. Because these boys right here, they're about to be thrown into a fiery furnace. They said, we believe he can save us, but if he chooses not to, he's still God. Some of you have been praying for things for a long time. Many of us don't always get the answer to the prayers that we would like for us to get, right? Maybe it's the loss of a loved one. Maybe it's an unsaved family member or friend who hasn't gotten saved yet. We wonder, God, why haven't, we don't get the promotion at work, or we don't get and we think, well, God doesn't love us if we don't get that stuff. These boys understood. God is God no matter what answer is given. No matter if it works out the way that we think it should or not, God is still God, and he's still good. We know our God is big enough to take us out of this fire. This furnace is nothing. King, you're nothing compared to this God. But if he chooses not to save us, he's still God, and we're still not going to bow. So I wonder today, maybe there's somebody here that's frustrated because you haven't gotten the promotion at work, or because you haven't seen that answer to prayer. Trust me, please do not lose hope. Do not lose faith in God. Maybe you're single and haven't found that right one yet. Maybe whatever it may be. Put your own issue into this context. Even if he doesn't grant your request the way that you think he does, will you still honor him? Will you still live for him? Can you say that just like these Hebrew boys did? Where does he come in your life when it comes to your priorities? Maybe you're facing decisions right now that you have an issue of submitting to him. I want to encourage you to submit to him. God is looking for men and women who will stand out from the crowd, who will have courage under fire. And the question is, can he count on you? And can he count on me? Let's close quickly. Look at number 3, the deliverance of God. Verse 19. Then was Nebuchadnezzar full of fury. If you think he was mad before, doesn't like it anymore now. And the form of his visage was changed against Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Therefore he spake and commanded that they should heat the furnace 7 times more than it was supposed to be heated. And he commanded the most mighty men that were in his army to bind Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and to cast them into the burning fiery furnace. Then these men were bound in their coats, their hosen, and their hats, and their other garments, and were cast into the midst of the burning fiery furnace. Therefore, because the king's commandment was urgent, and the furnace exceeding hot, the flame of the fire slew those men that took up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And these 3 men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, fell down bound into the midst of the burning fiery furnace. Now, we don't know what the furnace looked like. Many pictures of it, and many commentators believe it was one that would have had it would have been underground to an extent. You'd have this chimney that would go up top, and that's where the smoke would come out, and that's where they probably threw them down into that. Who knows? Many times we picture it as a big door. Probably the door the king looks through here in just a minute is probably just one to put wood and stuff into it. But it was so hot, the Bible says, that it killed the men who threw these three young men in there. So these 3 boys have no chance, right? I mean, it kills the men who've bound them and thrown them in. These 3 boys are probably dead on arrival. They're dead before they even hit the floor. That's not what happened, is it? We know that's not what happened. Well, look at what happened. Verse 24. Then Nebuchadnezzar the king was astonished, and rose up in haste, and spake, and said unto his counselors, Did not we cast 3 men bound into the midst of the fire? Well, yeah, king, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. There was 3 of them. They answered and said to the king, Oh, true, O king. He answered and said, Lo, then why do I see 4 men loose, walking in the midst of the fire? And they have no hurt, and the form of the 4th is like the Son of God. Then Nebuchadnezzar came near to the mouth of the burning fiery furnace, and spake and said, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, ye servants of the Most High God, come forth and come hither. Then Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came forth out of the midst of the fire, and the princes, governors, captains, kings, counselors, being gathered together, saw these men upon whose bodies the fire had no power, nor was a hair on their head singed, neither were their coats changed, and the smell of fire had passed on them. Now, I don't know about you, but I can't walk within a mile of a fire and not smell like smoke. Okay, it's just I have an attraction to smoke apparently that I walk outside and I'm gonna smell like smoke at some point from being around somebody burning in another county. It seems like. But yet these boys were thrown right to the midst of a fire, and not only was not anything singed on their head or on their entire bodies, their clothes were still intact. They didn't even smell like smoke. Guess what? The only thing that was off of them was what? Their bindings. It burnt the bindings off of them, but everything that they had on was untouched. There was a fourth one in there. Well, who was that fourth one? Well, we don't know who the fourth one was. The Bible says it was like the Son of God. I believe it probably was the Son of God that if you will, a vision of Him, or He was in there with them. But the great comfort for us is the same comfort these boys had. They were willing to risk it all. They didn't know if God was going to do it. It didn't matter. They did what was right. They were willing to stand out from the crowd no matter what it cost them. They were willing to stand up for the crowd. Stand out from the crowd. And here's my question to you, and I'm going to close. What happens next is the king is so impressed with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and more importantly, their God, that he makes a decree. And the decree is that everybody has to worship their God, who he says is the one true God, and he promotes them even a next question, the king promoted them again in the province of Babylon. So here's my question to you, and I mentioned this already at the very beginning of the sermon. Every single one of us is going to be tested, right? You've been tested. Maybe you haven't passed that test at all times. Maybe you failed that test. Maybe you would be the one bowing down like I would have been many times in my life as well. Remember, everybody's temptations are different, right? Daniel didn't face the fire, did he? But Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego didn't face the lion's den either, did they? It was different for everybody. And what you go through is going to be different than what I go through. But the bottom line is we're all going to go through things. We all face temptations. We all face trials. We all face difficulties in this life. And so the one question I have is this: can God count on us? Can He count on you? Can He count on me to stand out from the crowd? Can He count on us to have courage under fire in 21st century America today? Can He? I hope so. If not, who can He count on? If He can't count on us, who can He count on? I pray that every one of us in this room could firmly say yes for Jesus today. I don't care what it costs me, Brother H. I don't care if it costs me promotion at work. I don't care if it costs me my job. I'm going to stand up for doing what's right. Some of you right now may be dealing with stuff at work or in some friends that you hang around that you know are not right. You know some areas you've already made some compromises in. You need to take a stand. I'd much rather take the stand now than just say, well, I've bowed so many times before. What's the big deal? We need people to have courage under fire and take that stand. There are times when we are faced with the fire. And sometimes, if we're honest, we would have to admit that we've backed down when facing that fire, facing the flame. Guess what? If that's you and you say, I'm guilty, guilty as charged, I've bowed more times than I've taken the stand, then guess what? You can come to God today and ask for forgiveness. And He promises you to give you that forgiveness. And now you can take your stand with Him. It's never too late. As long as you have breath left in your body, it's never too late to take that stand. Some of you may be in the fire right now. You may be going through some things right now where you feel those flames and you feel the heat and you're wondering, am I going to take the stand? Am I going to do what's right? But I want you to understand, Jesus is right there with you, just like He was with those 3 Hebrew boys. He's right there with you in the midst of what you're going through. If you need help, seek His face. Seek His help for your furnace that you're going through. And now's the time to come to Him. And then maybe there's some of you that are just like Nebuchadnezzar. Say, Brother Adrian, what do you mean by that? Maybe you only have an acquaintance with God. Remember, Nebuchadnezzar knew about their God from the first couple of chapters, but he never surrendered his life to God that we know of. Maybe you know all about God. You know about this God that we're talking about, but you've never given your life to Him. Can I encourage you, today is the day to do that? I don't care where you're at. If you're in a fire, out of a fire, or getting ready to go into a fire, let's take today and make a commitment to Him that, God, no matter what comes my way, No matter what you allow into my life, God, no matter what the world and the devil and my own sinful flesh try to get me to conform, I'm not going to do it. I'm going to take a stand no matter what. Because, God, I know that you're good. God, I know that you're going to see me through this. God, I know this prayer that I'm praying, I know you can work miracles. But if not, I'm still going to trust you. I'm still going to be your servant. I'm still going to be dedicated to you. Wherever this message today has found you, whether you're in the boat with Nebuchadnezzar, or you're with the boys, or maybe you've bowed like the other people that were in front of that furnace, or in front of that statue, I want to encourage you to deal with it today before the Lord. Don't put it off. Don't say, well, let me think about it and I'll come back to it. Now, if you're not willing to make the decision today, I can go ahead and tell you what you're going to be doing. You're going to be bowing. Let's make the decision to take a stand for Him. There's hope. There is help in coming to God. So let's come to Him today. Every head bowed, every eye closed. Would you stand to your feet this morning?